Welcome to Unapologetically Sensitive, where you can learn, relate, laugh, and maybe even live a bolder, brighter life. I'm your host, Patricia Young. This is a weekly podcast where we explore the strengths we have because of our sensitivity and some of the challenges it poses as well. The information in this podcast is not a substitute for help from a licensed mental health professional. Hey there. To the creatives, healers, sensitives, and deep thinkers, how the heck are you? It is the end of April when you'll be hearing this. How's your late spring going? Today's episode with Jen, I do a lot of the talking. The things that we talk about, and I don't think it's a heavy or intense episode. I think I say this while Jen and I are talking too. But I talk about this experience that I had before my son left for boot camp and some of the feelings that came up for me around that and how I realized a lot of that is around historical grief and not so much about the moment. But ways that I dealt this last week before he left, after he left, about what did I do with my catastrophic thinking? What do I do when there's a lot of uncertainty? What are the things that bring me comfort? I don't think that I talked about this much in the episode, but I also slowed things down for the week. I really tried to be gentle with myself. I found it was very hard for me to prepare food, to get food. So we got food out a fair amount. That's okay. Just really took things as easy as I could. And I think that when we go through times of change, of grief, of loss, that it's not the time, if it's possible, to power up. It's really a time to kind of power down and to honor where you're at. And if that means that, ideally we're eating enough and we're drinking enough. Some days I didn't drink enough. Sometimes I made great food choices. Sometimes I didn't eat enough because it just was too hard to go get something to eat. Some days I moved my body. Sometimes I didn't. Whatever it is that you're needing, and to really try and tune into what are your needs. So we talk about uncertainty. We talk a little bit about travel. What are the things that I do when I know that I'm going to be traveling that make it more helpful? I had some communication bumps that came up, how I navigated those, talking about feeling too much, feeling like I wasn't enough, feeling like I felt guilty because I wanted to do something that was going to take care of myself, but I had competing needs with my son. I think that the specific information is my story. I think it's very relatable. The context in the story may be different for you, but I don't know. I think it's pretty good. We'll see. And now, on to the show. Hey, Jen, how are you?
Hi, my dear. How am I? I'm good, actually.
Are you?
Yeah, life's been exciting and fun, and definitely had some ups and downs too as I'm riding my waves here, but really happy at the moment. I'm happy to be here with you. How are you doing?
I think I'm okay. We record on video, and I'm feeling like I look dumpy today, and that's bugging me. And I do use the video for clips to promote the podcast, so there is a little bit of a relevance to, I guess it's just how it is, though.
It's funny. I had a couple of days this past week. I just call them my body image days were like blah. And I was really, I don't know. It's like there's a part of me that drank the Kool-Aid of all of our beauty ideals and when she gets activated, it can be tough. Yeah. And it's, even though I know better and it still can really grab me. It grabbed me for a couple of days. So I just want to join with you in that. And I get salty, like I get mad about it because, I'm looking at you and here I'm like just so happy to see my friend and you look beautiful and I love your smile and like we're just so much more than all of those stereotypes and stuff. And I start to get angry.
Yeah. Well, I didn't even know what was going on. It's not like this has been going on. And it's interesting. Part of what we're going to talk today about is grief. And last Sunday, so today's Sunday, so a week ago, we went up to spend the night at both of my kids' house because my other son was leaving for boot camp. And he was going through his stuff and we're taking and storing whatever he doesn't want. And he used to work at a place and he had, uniforms and he had sweatshirts and one of them had his name on it. And I'm wearing it now. It has his name. I've worn it every day except for yesterday, it's probably going to stand up on its own. And it's helping me feel close to him. But then when we got on video and I didn't feel good, I'm like, the dilemma of like comfort or vanity. And then I'm mad that I'm mad that I get comfort, but I don't think I look so great in the sweatshirt.
Comfort versus vanity. Yes, I hear you. That struggle is real, isn't it?
If you're not going to be recorded on video, I don't think it's an issue, or it wouldn't be for me.
No,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It's funny. I went back in my 20s. I lived outside for about a year, and I had very limited access to mirrors.
Mm-hmm.
It was wonderful.
Yeah. 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 I want to talk today about a couple things: grief, loneliness. And I think there's, for me, what's coming up, and I'm really surprised. Well, there's this current grief, but it's activated historical grief. And I think so much trauma from my childhood. And my guess is that this is relevant for many of you. If you're neurodivergent, chances are that you probably dissociated, were not present in your body. You know, lots of things go on. And it's fascinating to me at 60, and I was a licensed therapist for 17 years. I had my degree 6 years before that. So I've been doing this for a really long time. And I did a lot of trauma work. And once I got diagnosed autistic at age 60 last summer and started working with an autistic therapist, there's just like so much more trauma there. And with Josh going away to boot camp, I'm really getting in touch with how much historical grief there is. And I'll tell you a little bit more about this. I don't think this is, well, from my perspective, I don't think it's a sad episode. I don't think I'm intense, so I may not be the best judge, but I don't feel like we're going to be talking about trauma, but I want to talk about what I've been aware of and how I've worked through this. And then also how much loneliness that there was in my childhood. And I think that's from the lack of attunement, that I felt really big things and no one was there to support me, to be there for me. And I had to learn how to just shut it all down because there wasn't anybody there. But now, as I'm starting to open up very tiny funnels from the present to the past, there's a lot there. And I feel really, every day has not been great. I had a pint of Ben & Jerry's last night. It's not like I'm sailing through this beautifully. I'm doing it very human-ish, very imperfectly, with lots of grace. But I want to talk about it because I think that we all have different ways that we experience loss, grief, sadness, change. And I want to normalize it and validate and talk about ways that may or may not work for you. I don't know.
Thank you so much for being willing to talk about that and to be vulnerable and kind of crisscross back and forth between present and your history and what your scripts are and narratives and how they light up, even really old attachment wounds.
Mm-hmm.
I just know in my experience, as you and I have spent, what did we just have, our 5-year friendiversary?
Mm-hmm.
Have spent this time exploring it with each other. I just know that I know now, like, it's so worth doing.
Mm-hmm.
And the gentleness and the compassion that we are, we learn things so early that then we have to be willing to be in relationship with, to feel it, to heal it, and having that compassionate presencing of others
mm-hmm.
and people in our lives who are able to attune. Oh gosh, it's made such a big difference on my life path. So again, I just want to really appreciate you for your mission here, right? I imagine everything that you have to say is going to be relatable in some part. As you're talking, I'm like, the details may be different,
mm-hmm.
but there's this thing as human beings that we all go through.
Yeah. Thanks. Thank you. I think I want to start at last Saturday. I think the week went fairly well in the anticipation of Josh leaving. So we knew he was leaving, was just kind of preparing for it, felt like I was being very present. And then on Saturday, I just hit a wall. I woke up, I didn't shower, I sat in my chair and watched TV probably from the time I got up until the time I went to bed. And I had sent you a polo, I think the night before, and sometime on Saturday, early afternoon, you sent me a polo. I was just so into my grief. I couldn't even communicate what was going on. And at one point, Steve was in the living room with me and I was going to text him like, I'm having big feels, don't look at me. And like, I couldn't even do that. And I just thought, if he even looks at me, like the tears were just so close. And I felt like I didn't even want to take a deep breath because I just was going to cry. And the thing that I feel really grateful for was I knew it wasn't permanent. It didn't scare me. It didn't feel dangerous. Historically, because my attachment wounds often come up with you, it would have been so easy for me to go into a narrative about, well, you knew he was leaving and how come you didn't pull on me earlier? And I, like none of that stuff came up for me. I just was, which is huge. We've navigated it beautifully. And you and I were talking yesterday briefly, and I asked you, like, am I hard to be in a relationship with? And I'm still thinking about you saying no, and how many times I've received that message from people that I'm challenging to be in a relationship with. I expect too much. I demand too much. I'm too needy. I'm too this or that. And I think that's still kind of floating around like, oh, I'm not too much. But I was able to just navigate it really well. I didn't pull you that night, but in the morning you sent me a text and asking me if I wanted to FaceTime. And I said, sure. And the tears just came. And what I realized is that so much of the grief was really historical grief, like I'm going to call it big G grief. And I have sadness about Josh going, but these overwhelming feelings were really very, very, very young. And I cried, we talked for a little bit, and then the tears came up again. I had another big sob. And it was really interesting to me because I did not know that that was there until it came up.
Yes. I was so glad I was able to be there for you like that. And I think it's just riding them, right? And not being scared and staying kind and curious, watching the stories we say about them. I know I experience this myself. And I know with clients that we can get really locked into our explanations and our stories and the stuff we already know about ourselves. And if we can drop that for a little while and just stay open and curious.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, with big G grief, I mean, that can come from real existential places, right? Like our sense of loss and our awareness of our limitations. And as far as the feeling too much, feeling like you're hard to be in relationship with, I know we talk a lot about how keeping ourselves in context. And really what matters is also as important as whatever it is that you're going through is what's the capacity of the person holding space for you. You know? And I have a lot of capacity for you. I do have someone in my life that's been with me almost my entire life that I don't have as much capacity for. As much as I wish I did or want to. So I just want us to be careful when we make these big assumptions about ourselves when so much of what we experience is in a dynamic, right? And it's funny, I've been thinking about it like this relational field, like that's between us. And we've managed to keep ours really clean and clear with our willingness to talk about stuff, with our willingness to talk about our projections and what comes up. And I mean, I know I'm learning, not everybody wants to attune or knows how to attune or wants to verbally process like every fascinating thing that's going on inside me, right? But when you find someone or some people who do, like, such a sweet spot, right?
It really is. I wanted to talk about this and was trying to think of a way to talk about it without outing the person that did it. And I don't think that I can, and I don't have the ability to try and change the names to protect everybody's identity. So my hope is that you will hear this in the spirit of this was my process and that it's my husband and he didn't do anything wrong. And I don't know how to say it, but it beautifully dovetails to what you're talking about. So after I had a couple of cries, we packed up, we got in the van to drive up to spend the night where both of my kids live. And I was very chatty in the van. And for the last week or two, I just have not been very chatty. Sometimes I am, sometimes I'm not. And I was very chatty, which means that I'm unmasked. If I'm talking freely, if I interrupt, that means I'm really unmasked, that I feel safe enough to just not be monitoring. And I was very chatty, and we had some silence. And then I started to say, one of the ways that I've noticed my autism, and my husband sighed. And it wasn't like a, ugh, but there was a sigh. And I paused and said, what was that? And he said something to the effect of, sometimes this can be a lot. And it's really interesting that I got angry and I got hurt and I got tearful, but I asked him about what that was. And we process very differently. And I often have a very clear memory when we are going through things. And he said, like, it's hard when we get into disagreements because, like, he can't keep up with me. So I want to be very clear that, you know, when I was a kid, my mom thought I'd be a good attorney because I really can, when I'm passionate about something, can be very direct and remember very distinct things. I'm not saying this is across the board. My husband processes very differently. So this is something that's not very fair for either one of us. So I just, again, like, have compassion for my husband. But he kind of tried to backpedal and say that a lot wasn't bad. And I said, I never hear you use the word a lot in a positive way. Like, you never tell me that thinking about golf is a lot or planning a vacation is a lot. That when I've heard you use the word a lot, it has a negative connotation. And I said, I was really unmasked with you. And what happens is, it's unusual for me to feel very relaxed, not so much with my husband or with you, Jen, but I said, for the time being, you've lost access to a part of me, because by doing that, it puts me back in a, I don't know what the word is. You know, I said it's not unsafe, but now I'm back on guard. And you have lost access for some amount of time until I'm comfortable relaxing again around you, because that didn't feel kind and it didn't feel hopeful. I don't know if hopeful is the right word. But when you were talking about context and having this thing yesterday with you going like, am I too much in a relationship? This is probably the first time that I've really articulated that I'm fine the way I am, but if you do not greet my excitement and my wanting to share with openness and acceptance, you're going to lose access to that part of me until I feel comfortable again. And it felt like a very civil conversation. I had very strong feelings. Of course, it was right before we got there, so we had to sit in the van a little bit more and talk. And he was very apologetic. My husband is not an unkind man. He doesn't say hurtful things. There is not a mean bone in his body. So I want to be very clear that it's not like he says snarky things. He just sometimes doesn't think about what he's saying, or he did try and come back and clarify for me. And then I reminded him what he said, and he's like, oop, never mind. So the timing was not great.
Well, I was just, as you're speaking, and you know, I love Steve very much.
I do too.
And I know how you guys are and aspects of your relationship that I admire. And I'm also just thinking this thing for capacity, because I know there are times when my capacity dips, right? Even in my most secure relationships.
Sure.
And, you know, just imagining you guys both going through, I mean, your whole family, right, is really going through something. And so I just have a lot of heart for both of you in this conversation, though, specifically for Steve, that he had a dip as he's processing all this stuff with Josh leaving. Right. And just the wisdom of, okay, I'm not going to put that out there right now. It's almost like this cooperative thing. You can't hold space for this right now. You know, when you say it was a very civil conversation, like, I know, right? Because you're just figuring out where the walls are, like where the limits are at the moment. They are alive and fluid, and I just think it's beautiful and not a bad thing. I think there's wisdom in there, right? That's okay. Wow. So, you know, I actually think that, like, even to bring it back to you and me, I always bring things back to me, right? I forget exactly what I probably just up to my eyeballs in kids and on all kinds of stuff on Saturday. So, you know, the different draws on our capacities and to be careful of the meaning we're tempted to make, right? Because it's not about, you know, what like historically, or if we're not as aware, those meanings come up from our past experiences
Right.
and match narratives that we're just used to having.
Yeah. And historically, I've done that when I don't hear from you and I'm having big feelings. I get into a story and I don't know if I was just so in my stuff that I didn't have the energy or that I'm healing. Like, I don't know what that is. He apologized when we got there. I said, I hear you. I was still where I was at. It was civil. And Josh and I took his dog Zeke for a walk pretty shortly after I got there. And as we were walking, I just let him know, I just want to let you know, I'm realizing that I'm pretty okay with you leaving, but I'm finding that I'm having a lot of big grief come up. And the only reason why I'm telling you this is if I cry or if you hear me crying and you hear like sobbing or something deep, know that it's not about you leaving, that I'm sad you're leaving and I'm having feelings, but there's big, big grief going on. He told me how much he appreciated that. And it just was so beautiful that day that my son Daniel, his girlfriend was there, her brother was there, her sister was there, Josh and his girlfriend were there. We spent time going through Josh's stuff and packing up what we needed to. Most of us went out to lunch and then we came back. We spent some time together. And then Josh and Daniel and Steve and I went out and had a dinner with Josh. And it was just a really sacred time. And it's not like we had any deep conversations, but we did have some nice talks about Josh is the younger brother, but Daniel looks up to him as the older brother and what it's going to be like with Josh gone. I told the boys how proud I am of them. It was just a really beautiful evening. My son Daniel is just so generous. We went to go have Korean barbecue and there'd be a bite of something and he'd pick it up on his chopsticks and he'd dip it in the sauce and then my brain's not working. Anyways, he'd hold his chopsticks. He's like, Mom, take a bite of this. This is really good. Like, he's just so, like, these are almost 24-year-old twin boys, and they're just so thoughtful and caring. And we had to go knock around, and it was an hour wait. So we went to a couple stores and just played around and knocked around. It just was lovely. The next morning, the plan was at 1, the recruiter was going to pick Josh up. We were going to hop in our cars. I was going to take his truck with his dog and drive it home, and Steve would take the van home. And late morning, they decided that they all were going to go out to eat, but I had therapy. And because my therapist is doing some trainings, we're not seeing each other weekly. It's every other week. And I knew that I needed this time with her. And then I had this thing of like, am I following a rule? Should I go out? Like, this is the last time. What do I do? And right before we connected virtually, there were a couple glitches technologically, and I started to have this feeling because I'd been feeling very solid and peaceful and just thought everything was going well. And I had this feeling of everything's going to fall apart, like something's not going to work and I'm just going to lose it. And when we started talking, I was tearful and told her that. And I just always trust that it feels like things are very random. But as we did this whole session, we talked about how much grief and how overwhelmed I felt as a young child, very, very young. There are some traumas there I haven't talked about. And it did feel like the world was falling apart, and really did some deep grief work and crying, and was so glad that I had met with her. And when I was done, I came out and Daniel was there, and my husband and son and his girlfriend had gone to the recruiters to sign some paperwork. And now Josh wasn't going to be leaving till 3. And the plan was when they came back, we were all going to go hit a bucket of balls. Not my thing, but my family loves golf. And then at 3, we would leave. And I felt exhausted from this session where I cried and got in touch with some deep work that I need to do. And then if we left at 3, it meant we would probably hit traffic coming home. And if there's no traffic, it's an hour and a half. If we hit traffic, it can be up to 3 hours. So I called you crying. Am I a bad mom? I just want, I just want to go home now. I just felt like my nervous system couldn't handle it. And having to sit in traffic, when I'm feeling rested, well-fed, everything is fine, and there are bumps, I've got room for it. But when I'm pretty much at capacity, my nervous system's already dysregulated, if there are any things that are unexpected, and part of my autism is about the plan was we were leaving at 1, there won't be traffic at 1. Obviously there could have been, but in my mind, and those kinds of changes are hard for me. I may not show it outwardly, I may not have a tantrum, but internally, it's a change. So, am I being a bad mom if I want to leave at 1? And you and I had decided that it was okay. So I was in the bedroom lying down, and my husband came in. I told him I was going to leave, and then I asked him to have Josh come in. And Josh went to sit in a chair, and I'm like, can you sit next to me? I had my hand on his leg because he's very grounding. And I said, I want to leave, and I want to leave now with the dog in your truck. And I could visibly see his face drop. And I feel like Steve is the one that interacts with the kids the most. When it's big things, they count on me. But for day-to-day stuff, Steve is the fun one. He's got the energy. He's got the go. Steve is kind of the one that he's kind of like the mom, and I'm kind of like the dad. It's very gender-based, but I don't know how else to say it. As soon as I saw his face drop, his voice got a little shaky, and he's like, it would really mean a lot to me if you could stay. And I said, I don't feel like my presence is very meaningful, like it matters. And he was being literal in the moment and said, like, you don't have to do anything. Just you being there is important to me. And at that point, it was worth it and important for me to push through. I wanted to be there for him. I didn't want to take his dog before he was ready. So I said, it's fine. They decided not to hit a bucket of balls, thank goodness. And we just watched some TV, and I put my head in my husband's lap, and I took a little nap, and we ended up leaving at 2 and not 3 anyways. It took me 2.5 hours to get home, which wasn't ideal. I couldn't see out the back of the truck. I've never driven the truck before because we had a mattress in it. I was going to stop and get some food because they got food and I didn't get food, but I had some trail mix. Like, it all worked out, and we can make a decision about what's going to work, and we can also change gears and decide to push through. Like, there is no right or wrong with it.
Absolutely. I love all the interactions too, right? Like, one thing I've learned in our work together is the power of just naming stuff. If you play the scenario out where you're not communicating and you're just like, okay, I'm going to push through, but I'm not honoring myself or my needs. And then you speak your needs to your community, right? Your family in this case. And they get heard, they get received, and they get met with someone else's needs, right? In this case, Josh, right? And then I just have no doubt, like, you found energy from a different place to push through because of that interaction, that had you not spoken it, that energy, and what like beautiful things were revealed in that, right? There was so much beauty in his telling you and you experiencing very, very immediately and directly that your presence, it countered the narrative. Like, gosh, sometimes just speaking and then, having that be received. Obviously, you and Josh have this secure base where he's not making meaning out of you saying that and is able to receive it and then be honest about how he felt about it. And it's just so much richer than if you had stayed in your head, pushed through, didn't speak of it, like, or whatever it is historically you might have done. I'm going to own I'm projecting here, right? What I would, I'm imagining my own self. So I don't know exactly how that lands for you or what you might have done in the past, but to allow ourselves to be held in our relationships, right?
Yeah.
So beautiful.
Thank you. And when one has that wound of too much, we also have the wound of not enough. I'm afraid I'm taking up too much space, and I also feel like my presence is insignificant. And this shows up for me a lot, that I forget that I'm attached and connected to people, that I matter, that people value my presence, that is the other side of the being too much, is that not enoughness. And what I noticed coming back this week was, so he's at boot camp for 10 weeks, and we did get a phone call. We get a scripted call that he reads. It just says, I'm here. This is when you'll hear from me. Goodbye. And we can't interact with him. I did say, it was on speakerphone, and I did say, love you. And I could hear him getting tearful. But what I found was I was imagining, like, my high empathy and projecting, like, what if he's not connected? What if he's lonely? They keep them up for at least 24 hours or 36 hours initially. Like, they do a lot to kind of, this is my perception. If you're in the Navy and you know more about this, don't quote me. They do a lot to kind of break them down a little bit. And I was imagining the worst and having empathy and feeling pain and sadness about that. And my friend Soup Jean, we were talking about it, and she's having a parallel process, not a child in boot camp, but where she can catastrophize. And she talked about imagining the best case scenario. And that was really helpful. So I decided, until I know that he's suffering or struggling or gets injured or hurt or, all the worst things, I'm going to assume he's doing okay. I'm going to assume that he's content, that he's managing. And if at any point I hear otherwise, I'm here to hear all of it. And it really has made a huge difference. And Steve and I were driving somewhere the other day, and Steve was verbalizing his own fear of what could happen. And I found myself having that, like my chest got tight and I started to feel like my energy go down and I started to feel fearful. And I thought, this is not my stuff. These are not my fears. I've been in a place where I've been feeling very regulated, and I'm taking a secure thought that Josh is doing well. And I just kind of imagined the energy in the car of being a certain color and kind of sending it back to that side of the van, and then taking a color of energy and kind of washing it over me so that I felt a sense of peace and calm. Because Steve can have whatever thoughts he's having. I get it. But that doesn't serve me. And I've worked really hard to try and be in this place where I'm feeling okay about Josh being gone. It's not that I'm not having feelings, but this is just what works for me. And how do we navigate our energy when we're around other people whose energy is different and we don't always have control? It's not like I could say, stop talking about it or get out of the van. Like, we needed to stay together, and we each have a right to process our own information. So how can you work around being in people's energy fields when it's not supportive to you and where you're at?
That's such a great question. I love that. I mean, as someone who, I feel like I make this joke a lot, like I was holding the entire world together by the sheer force of my anxiety for so many years, and really overstepping my boundaries, right? It's like kind of the textbook definition of codependency that I use is like, I need you to be okay for me to be okay. So I'm going to hop out of my lane and try to do your work for you. And that to me is directly related to attachment and what I call hustle energy, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's all on me. I have to make sure. And so as I've grown and we do talk a lot about attachment, you can achieve secure attachment later in life. That is totally doable. And I noticed that as I've done that, I feel so much more grounded and centered and comfortable letting other people take up space, have their process. I'm more emotionally available for them because I'm not always trying to head it off.
Right.
Doesn't mean I don't care. But I realize in relationship now, it's important for me to back up and let someone share the relational field with me. Like, it's something we weave together, and it's not all on me. In the past, I might have wanted to do that person's work for them because if they're not okay, I don't feel safe or okay. And I think that's beautiful, especially if you claim any of, that word empath, right? Where we can like tap into energy, we can feel sometimes what our loved ones are feeling or what other people are feeling, and really be like, okay, that's not mine. And this person has it. It's like, it's so respectful of their autonomy, of their journey why would we want to take that away from them? It's what, in that moment, as a parent, we all have that journey to walk ourselves, and your companions on the journey.
Yeah.
Right? You're not going to go and do that for him. I think what you just described of being able to sit there, breathe, realize like where you end and he begins in that relational field, and maybe be the respectful asking, like, what are you needing from me in this moment? Or I know what I need in this moment. And that is, I don't have the capacity to do this right now.
Right.
So I'm just going to send that back to you. And I'm sure you guys will continue to process this, in these 10 weeks or in these months coming up. I kind of find life's pretty generous that way.
Yeah.
Like, we do have the space
to
give each other.
The other thing that I noticed, thank you, little tasky brain. One of the ways that I deal with uncertainty is getting information. And I'm convinced that this is part of my autism. Unknowns, uncertainty is challenging for me. And the way that I feel comfortable is by getting information so that things feel a little bit more known to me. And I'm really blessed to be part of a couple of military moms groups. And I asked some questions because we knew he was going to be graduating, but we didn't know when. We want to get airline tickets, all this stuff. And I jumped into one of my groups and asked, and found some of the most amazing groups that have incredible files. So the day after we got back, I spent the morning reading most of the files that were in that Facebook group, and confirmed within a day or two, we had his graduation date confirmed, got lots of information. And then we decided to book our airline tickets, found an Airbnb to stay in. And those things have been really empowering, to feel like there's a date, there's a plan, we're going to see him. And getting that information even before we booked anything is part of how I feel more secure when there's uncertainty. And I'm really good at connecting and getting information when I need to. There's this part of me that gets overwhelmed and doesn't function. And there's this other part of me that gets incredibly tenacious. And we have a group chat, and I'm the one that's pretty much sending out, this is the address, this is how it needs to be formatted, this is what we can and can't do. And does that resonate for you? And is that helpful for you, that if you have change or things that are unfamiliar coming up, are there ways that you can get information so that you feel a little bit more prepared? And my sense is it also gives me a little bit more of a sense of autonomy with my PDA, the pathological demand avoidance or pervasive drive for autonomy, that having a sense of agency, control over things. And I'm not saying controlling the situation, but like, he's there. We don't know when we can write to him. We don't know where we can write. We know he's going to graduate. We don't know when. For me, being proactive, if I can get that information, then that helps me feel like I have my finger on the pulse and can guide things a little bit better. And so I'm excited about, we've got a plan. And I have to say with travel, that traveling is very stressful for me. And I just saw this TikTok creator who's autistic, brilliant, was talking about his concerns about traveling and needing someone to go with him when he got from the airport to the next place, and how he was having some shame and ableism about that. And then I just saw he did a TikTok this morning. There's a sunflower lanyard that you can wear if you're autistic and you travel at the airport, and it's to let people know that you're autistic and you might have special needs. And I do get pre-boarding because of my autism. When I booked the airline ticket, she asked if I needed a wheelchair. And when I explained no, then she said I had to talk to somebody else. I think in her mind that the only disability that was in her mind is if I needed a wheelchair. Okay, whatever. And when I saw this creator wearing a lanyard, this is part of my own internalized ableism, that I'd rather mask and not have anybody know that I'm autistic than to say I do have special needs. And if I pre-board, that helps with my anxiety. It helps me get settled. And anything that I can do to keep my nervous system regulated is helpful. And with traveling, I do better if I do a direct flight. And because we have to get our graduation tickets the day we get there, we have to be on base. Pacific Standard Time, it's 4:30 in the morning. We have to be there. It's 7:30 Eastern Time. But we needed to get a flight. And I thought if we had to change planes and there was a delay or a cancellation and we couldn't make the graduation, that would be upsetting to me. So part of how I take care of myself is spend more and get direct flights. And we're getting in at 12:30 the day before. So if there are any hiccups, hopefully we'll be able to get the rental car, get the tickets for graduation, maybe get some food for the house. These are the ways that I take care of myself. For me, if there are hiccups and it means that I'm going to miss graduation or be concerned about missing it, that will be very dysregulating for me. And that is not good for me or anybody else around me. So what are the accommodations that you need for yourself that make it work better? The other thing that's really interesting is Josh's girlfriend and I are very similar, and they gave him a little bit of money to get food. He was in San Diego for a while, then he flew somewhere else, and then he flew to where he was going. And he figured when he got to the second place, he would buy food. And as it turns out, there was a delay. They got off the plane. They went to the next plane. He didn't get to eat. He didn't get in until after midnight. He hadn't eaten. She had packed him a snack. He didn't have it. And I said to her, like, you and I would have had a snackle box, if we're traveling. Like anytime I travel, I know that I get hungry all of a sudden. And then if I don't eat or have enough to drink, so I keep bars on me, I would have been very prepared. And it's interesting because Josh and my husband are very much like, they travel with a toothbrush. And when we went up to spend the night, I had a lot of stuff with me and I felt a little embarrassed, but that's what it takes for me to feel comfortable, to have the things that bring me comfort. And I use some of them, I didn't use others. So when I travel, you can bet your sweet patootie that I will have snacks on me and that I will have things to drink, because if there are delays or unforeseen things, these things keep my body fueled and it keeps my nervous system regulated.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you took care of yourself in that way.
Yeah.
I know when we were talking about it, I think I may have made the suggestion, like, if as a group, everyone's going to take flights with, that have layovers and stuff, that it is okay for you to be like, I'm going to get the direct one.
Yeah.
And then you can kind of scout ahead or whatever.
Right.
What you were talking about, I thought was so brilliant. We all sort of have to wrestle with uncertainty and how it makes sense to put some thought into, or some strategizing how to deal with it, right? Because there's so much uncertainty in life. And so you finding the things that you can do, finding the resources, finding the information. In some ways, when I think about secure attachment in relationships, right? Relationships with people close to us, my most meaningful relationships, I also think about having secure attachment just with life. And I feel like as you were talking, it was occurring to me, it's like, there are things you can't control, and like life's kind of got that. But then knowing what you can, and this is what we do in relationships, right? It's like knowing that that's not in your lane, right? That was Steve's lane, and you can share information back and forth from your lanes. But so it's like really getting into being willing to be in a relationship with the aspects of life that you can control, and then the aspects of life that you can't, and just having that wisdom. I think that's awesome.
Thanks. We need to wrap up. So I think, is there anything else you want to say? There was something else I was going to share about, but I think it can wait.
We can record another one of these.
Yeah. Anything else?
No, my friend. Thanks for having me here with you.
Thanks for being here. Happy 5 years.
Happy 5 years to us. Yay, us.
Yay, us. Our friendship and relationship has really changed over the years. I used to not want to do FaceTime calls with you or phone calls. It felt too threatening, too scary, too uncomfortable. And that has really shifted for both of, well, I don't know about for you, but for me.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I don't think I wanted to at the very beginning either.
Yeah.
I'd have to think about it. But I'm assuming I didn't, because we didn't. I didn't ask for it. I didn't.
Yeah. Or if you, like I don't know what was going on with you. My mind, everything was fine with you, and I was the one that had all the hangups. So I was not tuned into what could have been going on for you. But I was very like, no, I don't think I want to talk on the phone. No.
I just always remember that one time. I know exactly where I was sitting at my desk in my last house. I had the couple of moves in the last 18 months, but not the last 18 months, but I had a lot of moves in a short amount of time. But I remember sitting there, and after having a moment of vulnerability with you, being like, now you're never going to want me back on the podcast. I'm just so defective. Like, no, I just know that you're human and you struggle in similar ways that I struggle. And it's such a comfort to share that. So thank you.
It really is. It really is. I just deeply, deeply appreciate you.
Yes, I appreciate you.
All right. Well, thank you.
See you soon.
All right. Have a great day. Bye.
Bye.
Hey again. So, what did you relate to? What resonated for you? I hope you found it helpful. I think that's pretty much all I have to say. If you're interested in working with Jen, you can reach out to her at jen@heartfulnessconsulting.com. If you want to work with me or reach out to me, you can reach me at unapologeticallysensitive@gmail.com. If you are interested in working with me, there's a form on my website that gives me all the information that I need at unapologeticallysensitive.com. I think that's all I have. Remember, sensitivity is nothing to apologize for. It's how your brain is wired. You have a right to all of your feelings. You have a right to talk about your feelings. You have a right to not talk about your feelings. You have a right to cry. You have a right to process quietly on your own. It's okay if your energy is outgoing or inward, if you need to move your body, if you feel like you're too much, not enough, if you need to set boundaries and limits. whatever's going on with you is really okay. And it's okay to not be okay as long as you're not suffering. I think that's all I have for you today. I really appreciate each and every one of you. Thank you for being here, being a listener. Have a blessed day.